We cannot forget that we are part of a whole. Let's reconnect and stand united. Trees and Seas is a global movement to unite forest and ocean conservation worldwide through film activism, bringing together local community activism and global education through film screenings, panels, cleanups, tree plantings, workshops, art, and music. Our collective effort to conserve the forest, the ocean, and the flora and fauna gives us all strength. We must take collaborative action across all stakeholders to push for systemic change from communities, governments, enterprises, and NGOs. Together, in locations around the world, our global team, Blue community members, and local partners are uniting to harness the power of film to bridge local and global knowledge gaps. Just as our human health is determined at a cellular level, the health of our planet is determined by the health of our communities. We believe that it starts in our backyards, in our local communities that make up our one global community. It's how we work and collaborate with these local groups, the experts that deeply understand their local barriers and concerns, and how we can best support these local efforts that drive real change to protect our land and oceans. Take part in this global movement by joining an event, hosting an event, watching and sharing our film library, or acting as an individual. Trees and Seeds build sustainable connections that allows us to preserve and conserve the planet we share with our neighbors. Visit the Trees and Seeds website to join this worldwide festival.
Good morning, everyone. Afternoon for a lot as well. And welcome to our panel. We're all in this together, aligning stakeholders in the fight against pollution. Thank you for joining us today. I know that there's people from all around. So before I do introductions, I just want to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for giving us some of your time out of your day. We hope that you enjoy this talk. For those of you who might want to, if you see at the bottom, there's a button to enable closed captions. We've enabled this to be in several languages. So if you go into the closed captions, you're going to be able to select your preferred language in case you need it. And if not, then the rest of the panel will be in English. Before we begin, this is our first panel of this year's edition of the Trees and Seas Film Activism Festival. It's the third year running. We've done this. It's been fantastic every year. It's great to see so many people joining in and so many people returning. It really gives us this sense of accomplishment and ability to touch people's lives. And to see all of you here again is amazing. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for coming for your first time or coming again for your second or third year's festival. We hope to see you here in the years to come. So let's get started. As you all know, in the world of plastic pollution, and indeed in social and environmental causes in general, one of the biggest potholes is that people are constantly playing this blame game. Nobody wants to bear responsibility. And so we've dedicated these last couple of decades to pointing fingers and hoping nobody knows or looks at what we're personally doing, right? And the result of all this is that efforts to find actual solutions to these problems are moving at a glacial pace, which is kind of ironic considering how fast the glaciers are speeding up nowadays. We're going to have to find a new phrase for that. But I think that we can all agree that it's a constant thing. Individuals want to blame the government wants to blame corporations, and individuals and corporations want to blame consumers. And it's a so-on blame game of hot potato. And I remember when I was a kid, everyone telling me that grown-ups are just that because they've grown out of childlike behaviors, right? But as I've, quote unquote, become one myself, I've realized that we really haven't, have we? We're still playing tag and we're still playing pin the tail on the donkey and telling the teacher it wasn't me, hoping someone else will get into trouble instead. And the only fundamental difference is the impact that our games and their results have on the world now. So what we're here to discuss is why playing this game and why placing blame elsewhere is not the best idea, and how, like Spartacus, we can work together, and doing so, we can move forward at a smoother pace. And to facilitate this talk, I'm very thankful to be accompanied by three fantastic speakers that I'm going to introduce to you now. And give me 2 seconds. So for our first speaker, we have Inigo Dasua. Inigo is a manager at Kearney, a strategic consulting firm where he has been working for 3 years since 2020 after completing a master's in business administration. At Kearney, he's been focused on the fast-moving consumer goods area and the sustainability sector, especially on decarbonization strategies, and leads the social impact team in the Mexico office. Thank you, Inigo, for being here. It's been a pleasure having known you these 2 years. I think that we've been collaborating as well with Plastic Oceans. So thank you so much for some of your time. Next, we have Rebecca Brochette. I just realized I've never said your last name before. Rebecca holds a master's of Arts in Environmental Policy, a bachelor's of Education in Secondary Sciences, and a bachelor's in Science in Marine Biology. She created AHOY, which is Atlantic Healthy Oceans Initiative, which is honestly one of my favorite organizational names of all time, in 2019 to inspire a change that will look after our ocean and coastal communities together. Rebecca's experience ranges from studying gray whales, zooplankton, and redfish to helping tourism operations move towards a more sustainable circular economic model. And more recently, she's worked to advocate for sustainable fisheries and ways to reduce plastic pollution in Canada. Rebecca and AHOY are also a part of the Blue Communities program with Plastic Oceans, and it's also been our privilege to collaborate with them for quite some time now. And more recently get to know each other. So that's been fantastic. Thanks, Rebecca, for being here. Especially since, by the way, quick parenthesis, Rebecca was in the field for like the last 10 days. So she's been working really hard and still had time for this. So that's fantastic. Rebecca, thanks so much. And finally, last but not least ever, Mr. Tommy Eaton. Tommy is the founder of Bamboo Brush and environmental project director at Humanitas Charity. Tommy and his partner, Rebecca, not the same Rebecca, another Rebecca, launched Bamboo Brush with the intention of educating and inspiring people to make simple changes away from low-grade plastics. Since launching in February 2019, they've educated over 2,000 children with their educational workshops, organized around 25 community cleanups, and launched their first social impact project, Plastic Swap Shop in Ayunswako, Ghana. Tommy is also in Bamboo Brush, is also a close collaborator with Plastic Oceans, and it's their 3rd year running, working with us on this festival and doing some amazing things in the UK. So thanks, Tommy, for all of these years, and same as the other two, thank you so much for being here and for always giving us so much of your energy and good vibes, man. With this, I don't know if any of you want to say anything extra about yourselves that I might have missed. You can go ahead and jump in. Tommy, I see you unmiked yourself.
No, I thought we were all going to unmic ourselves then, so I shot the gun. No, that's great. Thank you, Sal, for that introduction.
Brilliant. Then what I'm going to do is I'll be sharing and unsharing my presentation throughout the session so that we can see what we're going to be talking about and then just focus on everyone's faces. So our first topic in this session and the intent of this session, of this chat we're going to have, this panel discussion, is for each of you to be sharing some of your personal experiences, both on your personal trajectories in life, as well as your professional lives, you know, the professional routes you've taken to be here today, to share some of your information, to share some of your experiences, and maybe help all of us learn a bit, grow a bit, and get a bit more curious, as it were. For all of you in the audience, the format of this presentation will be, each of them will be participating in their selected questions. We'll have an overall topic, but each one with a specific directed question. And after the session is over, we will have some time, hopefully, for a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout this session, throughout the chat, be sure to jot them down. There's a section at the bottom for the Q&A where you can submit all your questions, and we will address them near the end. So if everyone's ready, we can get started with our first session, our first part of the session. So the first question summary is, what has your experience been like with this topic, working from each one of your sectors? In specific, and Inigo, if you're okay with it, we'll start with you.
Perfect.
Working at a large international consulting agency, what experience have you had, and what are your thoughts on this division of laying blame or who has more responsibility when it comes to sustainability efforts?
So, well, my experience, I've been working with multiple companies on this topic for the last years. It's a hot topic on everybody's mind. I will say, I don't see so much as blame here and blame there. It's more like a game everybody's playing, and it's a game where at the end, everybody can win if they start doing stuff. I think I've said, like, there are two types of countries. There are they're more oversimplifying. There are countries who have like strong regulators, and when the regulator is strong and the regulator says to do stuff, that's pretty convincing for companies, for customers. If you need to limit your emissions because the regulator is saying so, you need to limit the amount of recycled material in your products. You need to, as a customer, you need to separate your trash for recycling. That's something that works kind of well. It's not it's more like in the stick instead of the carrot style today in those countries. But I feel that's a dynamic that we see, and a lot of companies are reacting to that. Like, what's, as we call it, the cost of not acting. Like, what's going to be, if I don't do it today, what happens when, I don't know, a new regulation of electric vehicles happens in a big city? Will I not be able to supply my customers? What's going to happen there? So they better start moving today. Everything gets trickier when you move to countries where maybe the public sector is not as strong, or the government is not as strong, I don't know, doesn't have as much influence in how everything works. In those cases, I feel the pressure comes to the companies, and because there is another player here, and they are investors. Investors care, or at least they are issuing and giving money and at a better rates to those that are complying with ESG topics better nowadays. So if you have like a strong ESG performance, you have like a benefit versus your competitors. And also here I see the customers, and it's something that is tough to prove, but at the end, customers, they are also showing a trend towards sustainable products. And also the companies need to sell at the end of the day, and the customer, it's kind of is the king. So at the end of the day, if your customer is asking for more sustainable products, it's asking for more recycled content, is something they care about, then the companies need to comply. So I don't know, but also on the other hand, customers are really picky. So the companies are scared, if I put like either recycled content in this bottle and the bottle now is ugly, will the customers buy the competition? So it's kind of a soft balance. But in summary to your question, I think regulators in countries where regulation is strong are kind of the kings of the game. And I will say the pressure falls more into the private sector when you're talking in countries where the regulators does not have like a strong presence.
Following up with that, you've mentioned it twice that it depends very much on where you are, which I agree with. Drawing from your personal experience, you come from Spain, if I remember correctly, and you've been living in Mexico for 3 years now?
Yeah.
What would you say, what's your opinion, or in your experience, what would be the main difference between these two countries in your experience?
Can I do London? Because I've been living in London for a month now.
Yeah.
Like here, for example, I've been here a month, and it's really funny that if you don't separate your trash correctly, they will not pick it up. And they only picked up the trash once a week. So if you don't do your recycling correctly, you're stuck with your trash for 2 weeks, and then it would just leave a sticker. So I don't know, I'm in Mexico or Spain, they usually pick the trash every day, no matter what you put in the trash, no matter what happens. So this is kind of an accountability to like a consumer level that is driven by the government, but I think it's really powerful because you can suffer the consequences for having your house full of trash if you don't do it correctly. That is a really nice way to make people comply with something as important as plastic recycling.
That's
Sal,
really.
can I jump in?
I was just about to throw it to you, Tommy. Go for it.
So just on that, and yeah, it's fantastic what you're saying. So alongside bamboo brush, one of the things I do is I contract for an organization called Clean the World. So, and they're predominantly looking at soap and plastic recycling in the hospitality industry, and very, very big in America, kind of in that early stage in Europe. One thing that we've seen massively is that legislation is so much further ahead in Europe than it is in America. Like, and I'm talking a good 3 or 4 years just in conversations around what certain terminologies that people in this echo chamber would use hasn't even translated into kind of some of the corporate sector. And the companies that we work with are kind of big global chains, hospitality chains. And I think Europe is certainly leading, but I still don't think that legislation is strong enough. To give you an idea, in the UK specifically around plastics, we had a plastic tax that started in April last year, which was, I might be slightly wrong, but it's £200 per ton of virgin plastic that is imported into the UK, which is more than 70% virgin plastic. I mean, when you work it actually out, the £200 per ton of plastic is nothing for big corporate businesses who are shipping in hundreds of thousands of tons of plastic. £200 for a ton is nothing. So I think these legislations are further ahead, but they just need to be stronger and need to be. It's like in the UK, we've got the plastic bag. Like you have to pay 5p for a plastic bag when you go to a supermarket. It's not strong enough. If like that needs to be £1 or a price in which people go, actually, I need to have a think about this. Sorry, I jumped in. I just thought it was like the differences between Europe and Americas I find really interesting.
Well, on that note, actually, Rebecca, if I remember correctly, you were just in Finland at the Circular Economy Summit, and in Canada as well, the Circular Economy Summit there as well. Would you agree with this, or is there anything that you want to add to this point?
I think, yeah, Tommy is definitely right. The legislation and the policies are all there from a European standpoint that makes it stronger in theory. But I know one piece for us, I know Canada is committed in theory all over the papers. And by 2020, the end of 2024, I think we're going to have 6 single-use plastics banned across the country. I think right now the 6-pack rings are currently banned. And in Newfoundland as a province, last year, the year before, we actually banned plastic bags, which is a bit bizarre for our province because we're not really forward thinking on plastic waste reduction, but I'm proud that they did it. But I can say when I went to Finland, I was expecting that every hotel was going to be, zero plastic waste. And because, I mean, everybody talks about the amazing policies that are created that. So I guess what I really learned from it was, one, they do have the policies, and as a whole, they're better. But there was some really honest conversations that happened at the end of the conference where they were like, well, you know what? Us in Finland and in the Scandinavian countries, we're just as big of a consumer as the rest of the world. So even though we're learning to recover or burn it, which is not better, we're still using all of those single-use plastics. We just have a better system to turn it into something else. So they're still using all of the virgin plastics. So I guess the jury's out for me on what one's actually better. It's and it's something when, we looked at stuff with Ahoy a couple of years ago. I had a master's student and she was really great. She was doing her thesis on systems and, where there's breakages in systems. And when it finally came down to it, we actually looked at the Western Regional Waste Management System for part of Newfoundland and Labrador to see, is things being recycled? Where does it go? We're an island. So I was like, I don't know where things go. This was after China and a bunch of other countries banned our import of plastics to their countries. So we went through and it was the same thing, like you had mentioned, Salvador. He said, she said, pass the hot potato. This is the legislation. Oh, I don't deal with that part. You deal with that part. So we had all of them to reference and we wrote this report. And Essentially, it came down to nobody really knew where it went. We gave the full report back to the province and said, listen, this is what you guys told us. This is what we have. And this is outlining all of the inadequacies of the system that we currently have. And we probably don't recommend extended producer responsibility till you fix the system you currently have that's not established. So although in theory, EPR is great and other circular systems, if you can't figure out recycling, how are you going to get to the more complicated ones? And then they had big workshops afterwards to tell everybody where the recycling went.
I was just going to say that this public, and something that for me was weird to imagine, but there are a lot of companies that have like collection targets, like 100% collection targets for 2030, 2025. I'm hesitant if that will eventually work well, but at the end, the idea, if that works well, single-use plastics are not that, they're still not the best, but the impact gets a lot better, because this same plastic, if it's collected properly, it's recycled properly, you get 90% recycled content on the bottle, then it's no longer less single use, it's more like a circular thing where the plastic has been used multiple times until it finally degrades. But again, you need a lot, as you were saying, Salvador, there's a lot of players, they have their own interest, everybody's pointing fingers, but I think if everybody will work together, at the end you can get this, like, not single-use plastics anymore. You could use plastic, but it will be recycled, and you will only use as much virgin as you need only to make the wheel continue to move.
Exactly. I mean, in an ideal world where plastics were only used where strictly necessary and responsibly handled, they definitely wouldn't pose the problem they do today. The problem today is not plastic itself, but how it's produced, made, handled, and the aftermath of its used, the intent of its creation to be thrown away. That's one of the biggest issues at the moment. So I completely agree with all of this. Coming back to the original point of this question, going back a little bit, because we are getting enthused with the chatting. I love it. Rebecca, coming back to the point of this like division and the hot potato game that now we've both used. I love that reference, that example. I feel like because we both work in NGOs and because both of our NGOs work in similar fields, we've had some similar experiences dealing with this issue when speaking with different levels of stakeholders. However, I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Additionally, from your experience in sustainable tourism, like working in that area, how has this game affected or what has been your experience in that sector?
Yes, definitely a good question. When we first, with Ahoy, when we first applied for money, the Canadian government actually released a Zero Plastic Waste Initiative Fund. And it was from Environment Canada, so it was land-based. And obviously we always talk about the ocean, but I mean, we all know where the plastic comes from, right? So it's from the land, and it eventually goes obviously into our rivers, streams, and oceans. So it was kind of great that the Environment Canada department had offered this funding. So, and you had to look at target leakage points, was one of kind of the areas. And the year before, we had just started doing our beach cleanups. And, when we looked at our data, and that was another thing, we don't just clean up and put it in the bag and throw it in the landfills. We do that full audit. A little bit of a shout out to Greenpeace is they taught us how to do the auditing of not only what type of waste, but also the brands. And it was, that was huge for campaigning and, knowing where it was coming from, especially from the EPR standpoint. So when that fund came out, we had noticed from the year before that most of the stuff we were picking up, like there is stuff from the fishing industry, but aside from the fishing industry, it was, food takeout containers, chocolate bars, pop bottles, Gatorades, like all these things that, largely weren't washed heavily. So you could tell they were coming from some coast close to us. So whether it be us or bordering provinces, but it certainly wasn't from like across, from the other side of the world. So us as Canadians were generally polluting our own beaches. And we know in our region for sure, we go from like 3,500 people in a region to 250,000 with visitation. So, we get bottlenecked on our waste systems. And it's not really something you think about when you think tourism, but it is a huge waste generator. So with that fund, we decided, okay, we're going to try in 2020 at the beginning of a pandemic where plastics was hot and exciting, that we were going to try and transition people away from plastics and prove to them that, in the tourism industry, we can break away from plastics. It was really hard, but we did convince 13 different companies, which included hospitality, so restaurants, a farm. There was a couple accommodations, like hotels and inns. So we went through all of them and we were like, you know what, let's just try it. There was also like a little community kitchen. We tried like bulk packaging, kind of like bulk burn. I don't know if you guys have those or not, reuse refill kind of systems. There's adventure companies. So we talked about reuse refill with those. At first, we tried all reuse refill. But again, we're a rural community. Everything gets shipped in. So even if it was like we did this metal container thing, it was still all wrapped in plastics. We still had to try and figure out that. What do you do with those things? It was successful, but I can say like over the last couple of years, it's almost an exhaustion because we all know being more environmentally friendly is harder. It's more expensive. So I can say that it's working, but I have seen some of the companies slowly shift back to the easier methods of a plastic bag, say for the lettuce, because it does keep the products better. So it's a constant balance where we're sticking around to help them. And I think that's helping it, the consistency of always being an organization around these companies. But I think if it's like a one-stop shop, you do it and then walk away. As long as those plastics are available, as long as that thin film plastic bag, as long as that straw, and as long as that styrofoam container is available at 5-10 cents and 30 cents cheaper than the biodegradable ones, there's a chance that it's probably still going to be used, unfortunately.
Which is exactly what Tommy was saying before with the plastic bags, right? As long as it costs 50p, if everyone can afford it in a very, very easy way, then they're just going to go for that because it's comfortable. You have to make it a little bit uncomfortable for start rethinking, like, do I actually need this, or was it just making me, I feel like I said comfortable too much. What's a synonym? Finally, to end with this section, Tommy, you once that you started Bamboo Brush. Before you started Bamboo Brush, you took this 3-month trip around Asia that ended up turning into 7 years traveling around into like this eye-opening experience, from what I understood from you, which resulted in Bamboo Brush. What my question for you is, with this traveling around, with these trips, was this division and responsibility one of the things that you noticed? And if so, how did it shape you starting Bamboo Brush?
Good question. To give some context, I did a 3-month, always wanted to be a teacher, went to university, went into education, then did a 3-month backpacker trip, which completely blew me away, and I fell in love with travel and was just so in awe of different cultures and different people and different thought processes. So lived across, in the East for the best part of 6 or 7 years. In regards to the question, I think one of the biggest things I found was coming back to the West and then talking about plastics was the blame culture, as in, look at Asia, obviously the whole of Asia, Southeast Asia is notorious for plastic everywhere, whether that's from the river systems or on the ocean or in the beaches. And there was when I came back to the West and spoke about plastics, there was this blame, pointing a finger at the fact that why should we do this in the West when all of the plastic is coming from India and Asia and China? And I think obviously that's just ignorance in the first place, because the thing that frustrated me a lot was the fact that people didn't quite understand that people in lower socioeconomic regions of the world across Asia weren't doing it on purpose. There was just no infrastructure. So there was no waste management systems in place for people to recycle or even put into bins. So there was just this kind of lack of understanding, lack of education from us in the West. But then looking at kind of the second part of your question, which was how does that link into how we set up the business? And I think that just the pure gratitude of living in, working in countries in which people have little to nothing, and seeing how great, how generous people are, that kind of inspired and molded how we run as a business, and being able to give back. And then all of those parts in our pre-Bamboo Brush of what we witnessed and people's thought processes, that's what molded the business in the importance of education. It's so important to go into schools and really give people. I even looking at now, going back to when I was at school, there was no environmental conversations, not even in geography really, around the impact of anything. I think now there is more awareness, but I still think there isn't that level, there's not that foundation level of understanding around issues. And for me, I only stay in our lane of plastics. I'm not clever enough to dip into the climate issue or anything else, but I think plastics have this incredible, I feel like I'm on repeat sometimes because I always use this word, but I always feel that plastics have this incredible capability of joining people together and inspiring them, because they're easy, because everyone uses plastics. We try and be as zero waste and plastic free as possible, but it's generally impossible to do it. I do think. So the fact that plastics are everywhere in our everyday life, we can use that as a positive. So yeah, in regards to the business aspect, that's what molded us. The education piece is so important. The action piece of organizing the community cleanups and the beach cleanups, of getting people inspired to take action. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question, Sal, in a long-winded roundabout way.
No, that was brilliant, man. Thank you. I am gonna go into the recording afterward and listen to it piece by piece. But that was fantastic. Rebecca, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to build off of it a little bit, because I think you said some really great things there, Tommy. Everybody understands plastic. It's so true. The other thing, when I went to, I was lucky enough when I started playing around with this whole plastics campaign with Ecology Action Center in 2018. It was still relatively new, as in like, who's experts, right? We were all just kind of figuring it all out. And it was largely after the first movie, Plastic Oceans, came out. So I was doing some educational pieces just in the schools. But I got lucky enough, the G7 was in Halifax, Nova Scotia that year, and they invited me to go offer recommendations from the sustainable fisheries side, but also on the plastics waste reduction side. And I thought it was really interesting when they had one of the keynotes up there, and they said, the only topic in the world right now, and that was again in 2018, that everybody from an environmental perspective to an oceans perspective to just a general person in the world, everybody agrees that plastics have got to go. And majority of the world is against plastic pollution and how it impacts not only the oceans but our health. So I think it's a pretty interesting concept, because there's a lot of environmental issues out there, from climate to, oceans warming to, biodiversity loss, that a lot of people may not agree on. But the plastics issue is definitely one that everybody can side with, that, it's excessive. So this has got to go, right?
I think that's one of the things. One of the problems with plastic pollution is that plastic is so versatile that, like you and Tommy are saying, it permeates life. But then whenever we are confronted with the amount of pollution and the damage that it causes, obviously we all want it to go, but then it's the seeing the consequences versus changing the daily behavior, and the not just on consumers, but creating legislation or policy, changing our personal behavior, changing the way companies produce their products, etc., is a big uphill struggle, even when we want it to be so easy, and even when we're willing for that change to happen. It's the challenge.
Just one thing on top of that just came to mind. Like, I agree, everybody don't like single-use plastics, and they contaminate and they are terrible. But also we buy them, and I try not to do it like myself, as much like the world buys them a lot, and there's blame everywhere, again pointing fingers, but I think they receive a lot of hate when they are post-consumption. But when you're in the buying process, everybody loves them. They're cheap, they're pretty, they're shiny. They have a lot of things that make them really popular. So that's always something that for me is frustrating. People say like consumers don't like plastic. But then if you do a paper bag, you put whatever, a drink in a paper bag and try to sell it, nobody buys it. Because they do like the shiny bottle of plastic at the beginning. So it's like a weird tension where, again, I think here maybe the recycled content of plastic, making them not single use or maybe more circular, there is something that way because they bring a lot of properties to the products and to everywhere that people do value, and they value them a lot when they're buying.
Now, actually, that's a good point to go into the second segment. Speaking of, as Inigo mentioned, when we look at the entire life cycle of plastic, not just the use and the aftermath, but when we go into the actual planning, the production, the intention after use, it's really important. So this leads to our second segment of what are the upstream and downstream barriers that you've seen. Now, for this segment, a quick intro for anyone in the audience that wasn't aware of this, but right now is in the works a global plastics treaty by the UN, whose intention is to create regulation about the creation of plastic, not just regulation on how it's disposed of, but focusing on the entire life cycle of the products that are designed, how they're made, why they're made, how they're going to be used, and what's going to happen to them after their use. Like Inigo mentioned, how are they going to be disposed of? How can they be recycled, reused, repurposed? Everyone knows about the 5 Rs. But the idea of this treaty, and one of the things that sets it apart, is that it's the first time a treaty is going to be made to be legally binding for those who sign it, for those who participate in it. So with this information, we go into our second segment of questions. And we're going to start with you, Rebecca. Because of your background with your master's in environmental policy, I'd love for you, if you can give us your perspective on efforts like the current Global Plastics Treaty being negotiated at the UN.
The heavy one. Okay, how do I break this down? Because it's pretty complicated. I mean, obviously with the UN, it's an international form of legislation that each country can decide to adopt or not to adopt. And then they put many years to get to that. So there's some little things there where, you know, I could speak from the Canadian perspective, I guess. The thing that always bothers me, I guess, like even without this, like we have the, oh my gosh, I'm having a brain fart now. But anyway, there's a couple different, like there's the Plastic Oceans Charter that we have currently in Canada, as well as some other legislation from like a provincial perspective, where yes, we want to aim to those goals, or even like at the national park perspective that we have here, where there's a management plan that says, you know, by X year, we will adopt the, you know, Western Regional Waste Management in our region. So yeah, in theory, again, going back to kind of the first thing we talked about, these are all really great. The problem being, even in a very well-developed country of Canada, you need to have monitoring, you need to have enforcement, you need to have somebody to put those actual political pieces and subsections and laws in place. And if every policy is may and shall and not must, it's up to the decision maker if they want to do it or not. So that's the problem. I love policies, as much of a geek as that might sound. They're really great. And when I did sustainable fisheries, once you know the policies of your country, especially the commitments from your country to the UN or the Plastics Treaty, you can hold them accountable, but there's a lot of effort that you have to sit down and be like, okay, you said this, they said this. And what other policies are in your country that contradict these commitments so that you can get out of it, all these loopholes. So I think it's great in theory, but again, you need the political will of your politicians from a provincial, from a country, and from a global standpoint, but you also need the people of each province, not saying, oh, well, this is really convenient, or, I just didn't want to say anything about the straw. Like, I didn't want to embarrass anybody. Like, you need that will from everybody. And sometimes politicians, especially, may not fight for it because they might not get voted the next year. Or, from my area, I'm in a town of 3,500. If I tell this gas station that they're going to get a fine, well, that might be my uncle. I don't want to have that fight because then it's going to come home, right? So you pick and choose. So from the small little local, rural, remote to the national, provincial, international level, I think it comes down to, the political will and what capacity your countries have to actually monitor and enforce. I think I answered.
Yeah, agreed. I'm following on from that, Rebecca. For me, looking at kind of that, I don't want to half of this room to hate me, but I have a thing that I disagree that net zero should be the main goal that we should be all working towards, mainly because 90+% of people in the world don't really understand what net zero is, and they don't really understand the benchmarks of what we need to work towards. And for me, I think I was very lucky enough to privileged to have done a TED talk, and this was like the basis of my TED talk is around for me the circular economy is so much more important than net zero, and then we could use that as kind of as a stepping stone because it's everyone can understand it, and then you can kind of break it down to a local level, to a regional level, to a country level, and be a bit more specific than this overarching, somewhat vague goal of net zero, which can be very I don't know what the word is, but there's the transparency sometimes in all these scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 metrics that are being put out there. I don't know where the backing is. So yeah, I think that it's so important that it annoys me also. The city of Amsterdam in 2015, I think it was, they did a big statement that they wanted to be the first circular economy city, and then 2018 the Paris Agreement was signed, in which net zero became the new hot topic. And it's a shame that I work with the city of Amsterdam when I work with Clean the World, and it's such a shame that the route kind of changed a bit, because there's so many great initiatives that could have been blueprints that could have been replicated all over the world, focused on the circular economy. It engages people.
Just make 2 grains of salt there. I cannot agree with you because I do like net zero, but I will say I think there is I don't want to oversimplify it either, but net zero is kind of easier at some point. Like you need to, your whatever is emitting, you need to transfer that into an electric thing and connect it to like a renewable energy source, and that's doable. And it depends only on the businesses and maybe some legislation, and that's it. I think with plastics, and I think what we've been touching here, is pretty tough, because you need all the 3 players to be working really simultaneously. You need the consumers to recycle. You need them to buy the product that they should not buy. They need to punish the companies that are not doing this stuff. The companies need to spend more money in raw materials that are more expensive in order. So, and in the government, they need to put all the infrastructure there in order to be able to recycle, in order to be able to get the plastic back and don't throw it to landfill, put it back into the system. So it's really complicated. So I think, to your point, whenever they saw net zero, am I going to do all this infrastructure, convince all these people, make all these companies align, all the consumers, everybody, or I can transition to renewable energy and electric vehicles? That
yeah, I don't disagree. It's for me it's a how do we get more people engaged into this conversation? And I think sometimes net zero is way too complicated for people to even think, well, maybe I'll try this. And I think that's the big barrier. to entry for a lot of people who aren't even thinking sustainably. This is way too complex for my mind to even fathom when I live in such a busy lifestyle.
I fully agree. I fully agree with that statement. I just say that for the city of Amsterdam, with all the hot the net zero was, and being it kind of more, the path forward is clearer in that way instead of the circular one. I can see them making the decision to prioritize one over the other.
I got one more thing to add to that as well. When it comes to that, and I hear you talk about recycling, I just want to touch on that for a second, because, after we did that report on, what is the system for our region anyway, the province ended up connecting, having a big workshop webinar, I guess, about where does it go. So we actually got to talk to a lot of the suppliers that took the recycling pieces. And there was one gentleman, I can't remember what company he was working for, but he said something that just stuck. And he said, even the best plastics in the world can only be recycled 7 times, and then they go to the landfill. So every single piece of plastic, no matter how many times, is still going to the garbage. So it's not infinitely recycled, it's infinitely going into the garbage. So for me, as much as I can, whenever possible, I just don't use it. And that's kind of our key message, is just turn off the tap. If you do not need to use it, find an alternative. Use metal, and I mean, people argue, okay, well, hydroelectricity, wind, all these renewables, the amount of mining that we have to do for all of those, rare metals, you're still using gases, you're still using all these things. So even the most environmentally friendly things out there, there is some carbon footprint. So for us, our message is just do what you can when you can. We're not against plastics, we're against unnecessary plastics. I mean, I wouldn't be talking to you right now without this and this computer if it wasn't for plastics. So it is a great invention. It's just we got lazy over the years and wanted convenience. So if you can get rid of all of those single-use things and look to our grandfathers and grandmothers from 50, 60 years ago, they had it figured out. They had their milk jars, they had their reusable, they had circularity everywhere. They reused old things and made quilts and all these other things. We just wanted quick and easy. And then women started working and, but we still want to be, there's so many things that happened that, plastics and big box stores and quick meals and all these things came. And then COVID came and everything had to be triple wrapped. So, I think the key message for us is just find a way to get away from it instead of worrying about banning it all. Find the good uses. This bioplastics, another issue. Some people are like, oh, bioplastics is greenwashing, right? There's no infrastructure to recycle or reuse bioplastics. So it's just a corn-based plastic that still emits all of those endocrine disruptors like plastics does. It's just another molecule. Anyway, that's
remember one of our science director Charles Rolski once gave a talk on plastics, and he mentioned bioplastics, and one of his points, which was beautifully if simply phrased, was if you modify something so much to resemble plastic, it's going to end up taking some of those negative attributes as well. So it's a really good thing to keep in mind. I am going to move forward to the next point because we've got 9 minutes left. I'm so happy that I invited all of you. This has been an amazing conversation. So I'm going to start joining some of the other questions that I had together. Inigo, from your perspective, we've heard about a little bit of what companies can do better, what people can do better, what governments can do better. What would be, in your perspective, the best way to achieve this responsible behavior from all sides, but even more so to achieve that collaboration to get these results? Because I think that we've all mentioned it in several different ways. The way to get the results that we're looking for is to all join together. If we're constantly fighting each other and there's division and separation, we'll get nowhere. But even joining together is a challenge. So for you, coming from that unique perspective in that you work with the fast-moving consumer goods and the sustainability, and you're a consultant you've got a really great overall perspective. What would be your suggestion to move forward and achieve this collaboration amongst stakeholders?
So I always think consumers have the power to oversimplify it. I think Tommy was saying it before, and I think the challenge there is in the really low income areas where the cheaper alternative is probably your way of living. And it's not because they don't like the planet or so, it's just they need to buy the stuff with the resources they have, and they will go to whatever will make them live better because that's their priority. They need to, at some, many times it's a day by day thing, and they need to get to the end of the day. So I think here the consumers have the power, but also the companies should provide alternatives, especially on those areas. And I think maybe the alternatives is not only like the plastic is recyclable, or as you were saying, at the end that will end up in the trash, or the material is biodegradable, because that doesn't work either. And maybe here is in terms of collecting, and then by technology, I'm kind of brainstorming here, but with technology, seeing what to do with the collection of the trash. But I think everything, and going again to the beginning, goes to the consumer. Like, you need to teach the consumers what is the impact on the planet of the decision they're making. And if that has to be, I think we touched about it, it has to be done through price. It's not through price. Maybe the stick is price. Maybe the stick is that whenever you want to buy something that is bad, it's more expensive than the thing that is better. Or maybe there's another option. I always think that this will end up being like a shelf decision. When you go to buy a product and you want to buy a bread, and you see a bag of bread that says like it's 100% recyclable, you see a bag of bread that says nothing, at least know that 100% recyclable is better than nothing, or paper-based or whatever, and you will go to the more sustainable option because it's better for the world than for the cheaper one. I know I'm all over the place, but there is no direct answer, I think, to the question, because it depends again, and in summarizing everything I think we said, it depends on the legislation, how advanced is the country. It depends on the consumer, what's he looking for. It depends on what is the product. So I don't know. In my opinion, it's at some point the only way to align all the players of the game is through legislation. And I think that's something that in countries that are less mature is tough. And I think at some point, again, going back to my first point, the private sector is the one that needs to step up and own its product. If you have plastic on your product, you need to own it and ended up collecting it. I don't know if I answered. I think I was a little bit.
Yeah, no, that was really useful. I'm going to move on to the next two questions because we have 5 minutes left. And I'm really interested in hearing everyone's perspective, and then we can do the closing statements. And if we have time and run long, that's fantastic. But Rebecca, stakeholders in that project, and what mechanisms worked best to do so, and how do you think we could replicate them into these different sustainability efforts?
Okay, I'm just going to reiterate to make sure I'm clear on the question. I didn't help zone it because the country already has all the fishing areas zoned, but I advocated for more sustainable fishing practices. Does that still fall?
No, that's fantastic. With all the stakeholders involved in that project, and especially in fishing, we have some of those efforts in Mexico as well. I know it takes a multitude of stakeholders participating actively to achieve it. So how did you manage to align them? And what would you say we can replicate that in other environmental or sustainability efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I started off doing sustainable fisheries, really focusing on herring and mackerel fish stocks, and then slowly moved over, and I'm now doing a marine plan with the Gross Mourne region to look at all types of zones and offer recommendations to our government to do a potential marine plan and protection. So, for the last 4 or 5 years, I guess, I've talked to over 60 fish harvesters, so small scale fish harvesters, as well as tourism operators, municipalities, all types of people. And I guess to the point on fisheries, our region in the Gross Mourne area has been lucky enough to have a marine station and active marine research since the 60s. And that one of those researchers, Dr. Bob Hooper, he was just always out there. He was always talking to the fish harvesters. 60s to now, he was telling them, you know, what he's seen in the ocean, and then would listen to the set up and the Marine Station, which is a part of Memorial University of Newfoundland, kind of set it up pretty nice for me because these conversations were happening for years. That when I finally came in and talked about, you know, climate change and sustainability and looking after our fish stocks, they were living through it. They were like, you know what, you know, Dr. Hooper was talking about this for years. Now we're in it. We see that the mackerel are on decline. You know, they hold their bait bags now instead of flick them over the shore, like they keep them so they're not littering. Even from an Ahoy perspective with our beach cleanups, you know, sharing on our social media and talking to the people that, oh my God, I got this many tons of garbage. Now they're seeing us cleaning up around their fish shed. So I think, I guess the short answer with going through all of that stuff is continuous community engagement with all stakeholders. You know, and this is why government a little bit doesn't work sometimes, because they come in when they need to do, you know, some sort of decision making. They do a couple little meetings and then they disappear. And then nobody really knows what happens. You know, then there's a moratorium on mackerel and they're like, well, how did that happen? Right? No one really talked to us. It says that they talked to all of us, but they talked to our union. They didn't talk to me. So, you know, us constantly on the ground. So I think organizations like all the people that are here today, being in the communities, talking to them, you know, listening to them, and then, you know, taking the knowledge I have as a policy kind of mover shaker when I can, and taking, you know, the general comments and turning that into, you know, these people want this. Here's your policy. Please abide by your policy and all the people that have voted for you. So, you know, putting their feet to the fire, and having the people see what we're doing over these last 5 years actually working. And they're like, oh my God, they're listening. So it takes a lot of time, but we are getting stakeholder buy-in because of it. And, you know, they are seeing cleaner beaches. So I guess that would be the easiest way, you know, and I know we only got a couple more minutes left there, but even like our province, like I said before, banned plastic bags. There are so many people here that could give two shits. Like me and you, like I know we talked about looking at a bread bag and looking for the recyclable. We care, not to swear, sorry. But like at the end of the day, it's quick. What's convenient? I'm not looking at the label. I need bread. My family's hungry. My kid's screaming in my arms. I just need the bread. So by banning the plastic bag, there was no option. And one day I was in the grocery parking lot. I'm like, oh my God, look at that fish harvester. He's taking his bag in. Like, would have never happened otherwise, right? So yeah, again, I don't know if I answered a question, but being involved.
I love that.
Yeah.
And for our final question before closing, Tommy, we've heard now the challenges on legislation and joining in different levels of stakeholders, the challenges of as consumers changing our behavior, or even the availability and ability to be able to change our behavior. On the other side of it, not just as a business, but as a startup, startups sometimes face some of the same challenges as consumers, right? The availability of resources, entering the market, et cetera, to be more sustainable. However, with your experience and with what we've heard today, what would you suggest would be the best way for small businesses and startups to align to these sustainability efforts and to collaborate with these levels of stakeholders that are involved?
Oh, good question. So for us, I can only speak for myself, but I do think this works. For us, we were very simple with everything that we did. We always jokingly say that we're not clever enough to be like business owners or whichever, but so we kept everything very simple. And our thing was one simple change, which was inspire or educate, inspire, and empower people to make one simple change from a plastic toothbrush to a bamboo toothbrush. It was really that simple, and I feel we are successful. We've sold over 5.5 million, which equates to about 110,000 kilos of plastic toothbrushes. So I do think that keeping everything very simple in our messaging and how the sale of our products help our fund our educational workshops and social impact projects. So keeping everything very, very simple. And I think secondly, from a business point or an enterprise or a startup point of view, you have, obviously there's that, you've got to have that passion. Like our passion came from witnessing plastic polluting what we were extremely passionate about, which was travel, and it was destroying the beauty of Asia, and then also having an impact on people who we lived with and communities that we worked in. So that passion came through naturally. But I also think businesses now think it's a very short-term thing. This is a long-term, like for instance, our partnership with Plastic Oceans. We've had this partnership for 3 or 4 years, and it's been amazing. And it's for us, and one thing that we do with all of our partners is we want to build these long-term relationships and long-term partnerships where we don't continually try and get more business and more business and more business. We just work with specific small amount of partners, and then look at how can we work with them to be more sustainable and create more impact. Just to give an example, is we work with Mitsubishi, who run a lot of the air conditioning units in the UK and the heat pumps. So we supply products, we deliver workshops, so they help fund our educational workshops, and then we organize big community engagement and cleanup. So it's like a perfect kind of 360 model of utilizing a bigger partnership and then building on it, and then that impact's just grown over the years. And the same with Plastic Ocean. So I think just from a business point of view, keep it simple, and I always say stay in our lane. Like, I don't want to go outside of, I'm not clever enough to go into the climate world, and I'm just very passionate around plastics and using plastics in this simple first step to get more people involved in the conversation of the bigger picture around the climate issue and everything.
I think that even goes with what Rebecca was saying, go back to basics, keep it simple.
Yeah.
And simple steps are always the easiest to achieve and sustain. So that's really.
And just finally, Sal, on that, and I don't forget the ripple effect of those simple actions. That's one thing. Always, like, you get someone down to a cleanup, okay, they feel empowered that they've done something for the planet. Okay, it may be little, but that has a knock-on effect, and you've kind of altered someone's pathway to just ask that question, and then hopefully in the next opportunity that question will be asked again. So it's that ripple effect.
Amazing. Guys, I don't know if anyone has any other closing statement before we say our goodbyes.
I feel that we could have spoken for another hour, all of us.
Oh, easily. Yeah. I've still got questions that I didn't have time to make. But thank you all for being here. For everyone in the audience, I'm sorry that we didn't have time to reach the Q&A part of it. I hope you all learned something. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to write us at Plastic Oceans, Trees and Seas, Atlantic Healthy Oceans Initiative, Bamboo Brush, and Kearney. For anything any doubts that you might still have, we'll be happy to solve them. Happy to do a second edition of this, I hope. And if not, then thanks everyone for being here. Remember that tomorrow we have our second panel, which is Solving Plastic Pollution, Enabling Change from Country to Local Levels. Tomorrow's panel will be at 10 a.m. Central Time in English and 12 p.m. Central Time in Spanish. So we hope to see many of you there, and stay tuned for more events throughout Trees and Seas. Thanks everyone, and have a really great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.